Welcome back to another episode of Word of Mouth Podcast presented by Johnny Davis Digital Solutions. Today we are joined in our studio by Courtney Lowe, who is the president of the High Point Community Theater. I was introduced to Courtney a while back, late last year, early this year, and immediately upon talking to her the first time, I thought this is going to be a very cool, creative conversation because when you think creative, you think performing arts, like immediately it comes to mind. And so I'm really excited to sit down with you and kind of discuss your background. You know, you're the president of the theater now, but you've been involved in the theater since 2011 as being a theater parent. So you have kind of run the entire gamut from seeing your own children perform in theater and then kind of learning the ins and the outs and, you know, figuring out what it takes to put together the level of productions that you're doing. Will you tell us a little bit about your background in the theater and sort of where you've come from and to where you are now?
Sure. So I was involved with the theater as a child. I believe my first production was when I was 10, and I played the hag in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And
Okay.
I had one singing solo that went, of wormwood and gall. That was my solo of wormwood and gall. And I sang it as pretty as that. So, which is really not the way you should be. As an adult looking back, probably not the way I should have played the hag. But that's kind of how it all started. I was in a production. I had bugged my parents to let me audition. And so I did. I fell in love. I did theater all through high school. Took a little break through college. I went to college for public relations instead of theater. I really wanted to go for theater, but my mother, who was very pragmatic, said, I don't think that's a good idea.
Let's have a safety
She
net.
said, you need to do something else. So she said, you can always do theater, but you need to major in something else. So public relations it was. I did that for 4 years. I went to Virginia Tech. My senior year of college, I decided to audition for a production of The Wizard of Oz in Christiansburg, right outside of Blacksburg. And I was auditioning for Glinda, the Good Witch. But I ended up getting Dorothy. And that show ran for almost an entire month. It was, I want to say, 19 performances. It was a really a big commitment, but it was a lot of fun, and it kind of reignited my love of the theater. So I did a couple more shows. Then I really got into my career, and then I had kids. And pretty much all my theater involvement stopped. So it had been about 12 years since I'd done anything with the theater when my then 8-year-old came to me and said, Mommy, I think I want to be in a play. And as a theater lover who never wanted to push anything on, you don't want to push your kids to do
Right.
what you know that you love.
Right.
I said, oh my gosh, okay, that's fantastic. So I got online and looked around, and HPCT was doing Oliver. Which was perfect for an 8-year-old boy because it's a show full of little boys. So I had I really didn't know anything about the theater community here because I was just working and raising my kids, and that was it. So we took him to the audition. He got cast, and that's how we got involved with HPCT, and that's really how I got back into the theater. And then during that production, I kind of became the go-to mom for all the other moms because there were a lot of moms because it was a lot of kids. And a good number of the families had never done theater before or had very little experience. So I kind of became the one that they would go to and say, oh, what does Tech Week mean? And what does that mean? And what's a SITS
Right.
probe? And so that was kind of like my introduction back into theater. And their next show, HPCT's next show, was the celebration of their 35th anniversary, which
Okay.
this year is our 50th anniversary.
Wow.
So 15 years ago, they were doing a fundraiser. And it was basically, it was called What We Did for Love, and it was a collection of songs from the last 35 years of their
Oh,
productions.
that's amazing.
So it was about 70 songs with choreography. It was a lot. It was like I called it my boot camp back into
I'm
theater.
sure.
But I got cast, and I did that. Met a lot of great people. And then really just kind of got involved with HPCT from there. Then after that, they asked me to direct a production of Aristocats Kids, and music direct Thoroughly Modern Millie Jr. So I started kind of getting into the production teams. Um, and then I started auditioning for some of the main stage stuff, started doing that. And then my whole family really became involved.
Right.
And that's kind of like where we are today, even though everyone's older. My 8-year-old at that time is now getting ready to turn 21.
Wow. Is he still
And
involved with the theater?
not as much. He is a musician.
Okay.
He has a band called Pageant. They're a rock band. They're doing really well. And so that's something but I do think his involvement in theater really kind of like kicked that off. Like
That's what I
our
was gonna
family has
ask.
always been very steeped in creativity.
That's what I was
Yeah.
going to ask. That has
Yeah.
got to lend to every, not to mention the self-confidence that's got to give children through their school day, like handling some of the challenges, as they're coming into adolescence, that they feel more prepared for it because they've got a background in how to have a stage presence, so to speak.
I cannot say enough good things about the benefits of the arts for children. It just goes so far beyond just what seems surface level, which
Right.
is, getting up on stage and learning a craft. But like when you get into teamwork and humility and
Right.
responsibility, because you got to learn your lines. There's so many different things that theater teaches children. And so that really that sparked him. Now Dylan ended up doing a couple of films, so he became more interested, I think, in film. And so he did a couple films, one with Ryan Reynolds, and so he really enjoyed that. And Dylan, that's my oldest, he had a different personality on stage. He was always kind of like he wasn't quite as big as me, like
Right.
my facial expressions and
Right.
my body movements are always pretty big, but he was a little more subtle, and that made him really good for film. And so he did that, and so yeah, I really that production of Oliver really launched a whole new path for Dylan.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
If you have a child who's more naturally inclined to be introverted, and I'm thinking about one of my children, and I feel like they have all of the desire to do it, except for the daunting being on a stage. What would you encourage parents that I think that this would be a good opportunity, to, get my child in front of people and, get them comfortable, in front of people. But do you see more challenges with more introverted children versus the children that are a little bit more willing to, kind of be in the spotlight?
It is so funny. But oftentimes those kids who seem introverted in like everyday life just needed an introduction to the theater. Because a lot of times I believe that kids themselves may be introverted, but when you give them a character to play, that somehow pulls something out of them that isn't just around every day. And it's not something you see every day. It's one of my favorite things to watch in the theater is when you've got a child who seems more reserved, or a child that maybe is not as social. But then you put them in a theatrical setting and you give them a character to play, and suddenly they just blossom and they become somebody else. And you can just see the spark in their eyes.
That is interesting because earlier you mentioned Ryan Reynolds, and I know that I watched an interview with him, and he had mentioned that when he stars as Deadpool, that he's able to completely hide behind that mask and be a character that he is not in real life. That he's able to tap into that he is more of an introverted person in private life. So I guess that makes sense that they're not playing themselves, playing a character on the stage. They're just that character on the stage, so they don't have to have the same fears and the tendency to shy away because that's not who they are when they're in that character.
And that's when you get the best acting, really. Like that's really when you're playing somebody that is not like you, because it's real easy to play yourself. And I see it all the time where people just tend to go for the roles that are similar to them. And then you're basically just playing a version of yourself, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But where you really like get to the heart of it and where the real like gratifying experiences, that's when you're doing something totally different. And that is oftentimes like what parents will see with their kids. When we talk about some of these like really introverted kids. Great story. When I started the theater program at Phoenix Academy. And I only ended up teaching there for a year, just kind of getting the program started. But there was a student there who historically had just been in trouble all the time. He was a student that a lot of the teachers had just given up on. He would just lay his head down on the desk, and they told me that's just what he does, and just, let him go. This is what he does. He had a rough home life. He was in fights. And somehow my class just really sparked something in him. So suddenly I had a kid who was sleeping through everybody else's class, but he was awake during mine. He was working on homework, which apparently he wasn't really doing with other kids or with other classes. We had a performance at the end of the year, and he was the most excited. He came up with his costume before everybody else came up with their costume. He invited his mother, and she came, and he was so proud to have her there. I watched a transformation in a child. Now, I often think about where is he now and what is he doing, and I don't know.
I was going to say,
hope that he's still. That's the difference between, I think, teaching in a classroom setting and then in the theater, because oftentimes in the theater, like, we'll just continue to stay,
Right.
with the families, and so I hope that he's still doing theater, and I hope that theater is still bringing him the joy that it did. But that the theater transformed that child.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and that I would say that's probably one of my more strongest examples, but we see it all the time in the theater, where you've got a parent that will come up and say, hey, you know what, thank you, because I've never seen my child have this much self-confidence, and that's a big thing for me. And that is one of the things, whether it's when I teach voice or whether I'm working on a production at the theater with a child, building their self-confidence is, I think, absolutely imperative, because that is the foundation for everything as they go through adolescence.
Absolutely.
They have to have self-confidence. They have to believe in themselves, because otherwise, it makes an already difficult time in their lives even more difficult. So that's a huge focus for us, is really looking at, what can we do to build these kids up?
That's amazing. And that kind of leads to the next question. And you and I were speaking a little bit before we started recording, but what are the differences you see as you're approaching a production that is centered around children that are new to the theater, but they're coming in with maybe less expectation versus an adult production? Because I'm assuming that you get a lot of adults that have never done theater before. They're coming onto a stage for the first time, probably having a lot of those own self-doubts and imposter syndromes, and wondering if they're good enough. So, what differences are you seeing in the readiness of adults versus children as you're casting a production?
Yeah. So, with children, you're going to run the gamut, because some kids have been doing theater for a long time, and are very comfortable, and you can really throw anything at them and they can, just catch it and run with it. Other kids, you need to approach it, in a different way. And you need to make it more, you don't want them to doubt themselves more than they already do. We use, at least I really like to use the idea of, mixing those two. I love having beginners and advanced together, because the beginners can learn from the advanced, and the advanced can also learn from the beginners. They can also work on mentoring. They can work on explanations and trying to explain why we do something like that. Because oftentimes, when you do it over and over again, you just know. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I'm going to do. But then if you have to explain to someone, this is why we do it this way, that's really helpful. Oddly enough, the adults are not that much different, because you have the same. You basically have the same. You've got people that are brand new and are less confident in their abilities, and look up to the people that have more experience. And then you have the people that do have experience, that, can go one of two ways. You can be someone that is humble and that is willing to learn, willing to help. Or you could have someone maybe that is, like we were saying before, that their ego might be a little bit larger. At HPCT, we really focus on the experience for everyone. And that's kind of like, we give that speech at auditions, we give it during our first cast meeting, that what we're about is making sure that everybody involved has as much of a positive experience. We can't fix everything, right? There's always going to be a few things that, are out of our control, but try to have the most positive experience possible. And one of the pieces of that is making sure that we have the proper environment that fosters working together, that fosters humility. And I always say we don't have time for divas at HPCT. It just is, it's community theater.
Right.
And I don't think that anybody in community theater really deserves to or needs to deal with someone who feels that they are more important than everybody else.
I like that.
Because the reality is, everybody is replaceable. Like, truly everybody is
Absolutely,
replaceable.
yes.
So it does get a little comical sometimes to see some people's attitudes about things.
I'm sure.
But you know what? Like we were saying before too, it can happen with children too. It can happen with teenagers. It can happen at any. And the thing is it's just you have to, you just have to be empathetic and try to figure out, okay, where is this coming from? Because sometimes the people, particularly in theater, so, when you talk about theater people, we are all very emotional, right? So, when you talk about leaving the drama on the stage, that's really hard for theater people in general, because we easily access our emotions. So that makes us, more vulnerable to things like that. So we tend to really, we're expressive for the most part. We're either very expressive or we're not expressive. We have all the feels but don't express them. So, one of the nice things about the theater is I think people can find someone who is similar to them. And you get that safe space. And that's what we want to create. We want to create that safe space where you are allowed to make mistakes, where you can lift someone up instead of tear them down. So that's really what theater is all about. So I guess, that's in a giant circle. It's saying, working with kids is not that much not different from working with adults.
Okay.
But sometimes it's harder to remember with adults, right? Like, it's easy for me to work with a group of 40 kids and understand, okay, you know what, they're kids.
Yeah.
And, I gotta give them a little bit of a break. It just takes a little more mental effort sometimes with adults to remind yourself that, you know what, like, there's probably a reason why they're acting like this.
Right.
And, what is it that we can do to bring out that other side of them?
Okay. I like that. So when you're in the middle of a production, or as you're beginning a production, what does a typical day in the High Point Community Theater look like? Can you walk us through sort of like, this is sort of how this breaks down?
Sure. So let's talk about Tech Week. So Tech Week is the week leading into a production. We're just going to assume we're doing a show at High Point Theater. Like, if we're doing one of our main stage ones, we just did Newsies. So let's talk about Newsies. So usually what will happen is we will load into the theater on Sunday. Sunday is always 8 to 10 hour day. You basically take your stuff from your rehearsal space, your storage space, move it into the theater. The theater becomes your home for the week. So you do that. Then while all that's happening, lights are being set up, the sound system is being set up, microphones are being set up. And then usually you'll have what we call a cue to cue. on Sunday night. And that is where you go from scene change to scene change. It gives the crew a chance to practice so they can do the set changes. It gives lighting a chance to practice. It works on microphones. So oftentimes with that, you're not doing the whole show. You're just doing like, you might do for Newsies, we did all the big dance numbers because we needed to space it out and make sure that everything was right. You do the scene changes. So you kind of do it piece by piece. It is a slow process. Then you get into rehearsal week. And rehearsal week, you usually have, we'll usually get into the theater about 6:00. By that point, we should have everything in the space. Costumes is always updating things. So costuming usually happens all the way through the week. But we'll rehearse. We'll get to the theater at 6:00. We'll start the run usually at 7:30, which is what time our normal performances start. And then we will usually only get through one act the first night, and then we'll do the second act the next night. Sometimes we can make it through the whole thing. If you have something like Christmas Carol, where you've got flying, where we have flying and Christmas Carol, we did this year, then you'll have flight rehearsals. So you'll want to practice some of those things. If you've got any fights in the show, you'll have a fight call at the beginning to make sure you'll run through. In Newsies, we had 2 fights. So every night you would run the fight before we started, just to make sure that everyone was on the same page and keep everyone safe. Then a little bit later in the week, we'll have our photographer come and take photos during the production. So then we'll have some promo photos. And then we'll have the orchestra join us. We always, in our musicals, we always have an orchestra, a live orchestra. So they'll come and join us. And then we'll usually, on Thursday nights, we have Pay What You Can. That's when we open it up to the community, and you can come see our show for any amount.
Okay.
So it is really, it's one of my favorite things that we started. We started it about 4 years ago, and I love it because it really makes theater accessible to everyone.
That's amazing. I like that.
I love it. And so, yeah, Thursday nights, put it on your calendar. If it's an HPCT show, chances are we're doing a Pay What You Can, and it's our final dress rehearsal. And it's understood that it is a final dress rehearsal. There could be something that, we need to stop for, or something could not go right with the lights or the projections. But it is open to the public. And it's great for our cast, too, because then they get a little bit of a test run audience before opening night, especially in a comedy where they're used to having basically just the director and the stage manager laughing at them. It's really nice to have a full audience.
See how the jokes
so yeah.
fit. Yeah.
So then that happens, and then we open on Friday. If we're doing a show that has like Christmas Carol that has field trip shows, we'll usually do field trip shows on Friday and Thursday mornings. And then we do all of our shows are just one weekend. And that is just from an expense standpoint, because
that's what I was wondering.
Really
so
expensive.
A normal production, you're gearing up for rehearsals and casting and everything else, and it's really over a weekend is when this is going to be public facing, where your ticket sales kind of recoup some of the expense you've had up to that point.
Yes.
Wow.
A lot of other theaters will do 2 weekends or multiple weekends, but most of those theaters own their own performance space.
Oh, I see.
So then that makes it a little bit easier for them to run the show. But for us, since we perform at High Point Theater, it is expensive. They are kind and give us a discount, but it is still very. The average show for us costs about $25,000.
Wow.
When it's all said and done. So it's pretty expensive. I don't think people realize how much it costs.
I'm sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm from a video production house. We know what it costs to make video, and sometimes that's the hardest sell. Talking to a client or a prospective client is getting them to understand the investment that we're asking them to make in something that is going to promote their business, promote their brand or their story. So this is a story. Performed live with it. All of the, I mean, if you're looking at 25,000, is that including your wardrobe, your costumes, all your dress rehearsals, everything else?
So that would be like it, the whole shebang. All right.
So then you're hoping to recoup that in a weekend, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I would love for us to do shows for more than one weekend. And I think there are some, like, for example, Christmas Carol, we could easily sell multiple weekends of Christmas Carol because it sells out every year. But also it's hard to book space because, performance space in High Point there's not a lot. Like you really have two venues. You have High Point Theater and you have Centennial Station Arts Center, and that's it. So I would love to see us have some more performance space here in High Point. When you look at Greensboro and Winston, and they have a lot more in that way. And it is very important to us as a board at HPCT to perform in High Point. There were a few times that we had to go to Greensboro for some youth productions just because we needed a space we couldn't get anywhere else. But I feel like being High Point Community Theater, we really need to perform in High Point.
100%. Yeah.
But it is tough because it really is. If you can't book, like I said, with Christmas Carol, we could easily do 2 weekends, but December is completely booked at High Point Theater, so we get our 1 weekend.
Oh my God.
But yeah, it's it is. It has become, not just for my family, but for many families, a home away from home. It's become a place for expression, a place for to feel safe,
Right.
A place to make friends.
Right.
So much. So many of my friends, really my very close friends, have come through the theater,
And I'm sure that from a creative standpoint, expressing yourself and, being able to lean into the creativity in our experience with what we do, the creative act will always beget the next creative act. It makes you start seeing your entire life through sort of a different lens, or at least a bit of a different idea of what's possible and what's next and what could be next. And so I'm sure that the people that they're looking forward to the rehearsals and they're looking forward to these, large productions that they're doing, it's influencing parts of their life that they're not even maybe consciously aware of. So that's can you talk to us a little bit about where you see, as both a performer and someone that's the president of the entire community theater, can you talk to us a little bit about how you see sort of some of those experiences or lessons learned on stage or behind the scenes on stage kind of seeping into different aspects of your life or an actor's life?
Yeah. So it's pretty magical to watch. Like, I would say 1 in 5 of the people that come through our theater have a transformative experience. Like, you can really watch it, and it's really, really cool. A lot of people in theater have not found a place that they felt accepted for whatever reason. It's, particularly our teenagers. It's tough to be a teenager. And watching some of those kids come through, and even adults that have always felt like that, but then finally find a community that they're happy in and feel comfortable and feel accepted in. It is pretty powerful. So it definitely, I think a lot of it comes from you give so much of yourself in that room, like in our rehearsal space. You have to be emotionally vulnerable. Well, you should be. Like, if you're doing it correctly, you should be emotionally vulnerable. So you have to put yourself out there. And so you have to feel close and you have to feel comfortable with those people. And I think that's where it comes from is, you have these people that you build this bond with these people, not to mention, depending on the story that you're telling, that's a whole nother level of bonds. Like, for example, I was in Next to Normal, which is a musical about a woman who is bipolar. It's about the family and, basically the struggles that she's going through. She's, got a daughter who is an overachiever because she feels like she's been neglected. Because the mother is struggling with some mental issues and is basically living her life imagining her son who passed away when he was a little boy. So she spends all her time living with this deceased son, while she's got a daughter there who's really struggling. And then there's the husband, and there was so much pain in that show, right? So much pain, so much struggle. And it's impossible to not become close with
Right.
that cast because of all the feelings that you're feeling
Oh,
together.
for sure.
So you build a bond
Right.
that really never goes away. And that is, to me, one of the beauties of theater.
And it's tackling life's challenges, whether they apply to you in your own life or not. You are able to see the way other people live through the lens of stage, through the lens of drama. That there are certain people that don't consider that a dramatic performance. That's just life.
Right.
So I
Right.
think it probably helps you identify with people in your community more on a empathic level.
Yep.
Which
Yeah,
is
definitely. It definitely builds your empathy. It is also, I think, it's really good for exposing you to different types of people, because oftentimes theater brings together a group of people that wouldn't ordinarily gather. Like you've got, people who are doctors during the day and come, to the theater at night to be in the show, combined with, college students, or you've got, an electrician, or you've got, all these different, people from different backgrounds and different walks of life coming together. In a way that you normally, or people that are deeply religious to, people that are agnostic. You're
right.
bringing together people who wouldn't ordinarily gather sometimes. And
For
that
that
is
common
also a
goal.
beautiful thing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So, outside of the ticket sales and and the applause, what happens during a production from the beginning to the very end, last curtain call, I guess is what you'd call that, that would indicate to you that this is a successful production? Like, what does success mean from the president of a community theater in terms of what you walk away from that season or that show with?
So for me, one of the, I think, most powerful things at the end of a show is to watch how the cast and the crew react and behave on the final day, on Sunday. If you see a lot of tears, which you generally do, if you see a lot of tears, if you see a lot of hugs, if you hear a lot of like kind words for each other, then I know we've done our job, because then people have felt part of something because they don't want to leave. So if you're feeling part of something, and you don't want to leave, then that means, okay, then we successfully built a bond there. If you have the audience in the lobby talking about how much they enjoyed it. I love to watch like the social media posts afterwards and people talking about like, I love this part or I love that part, or just kind of go in the lobby and kind of listen to what people are saying. To hear people, I also love to hear the phrase, I've never seen an HPCT show before, but this was amazing. Or
Yes, it's
this
gotta
was,
be
right? Like,
so rewarding.
somebody, sometimes it breaks my heart a little bit to hear, I'd never heard of you guys, but now I'm like, wow, you're really good. I'm like, how did you never hear about us? But even that, it's like, when people discover what it is we're doing, and discover, or also another really great thing to hear is, I can't believe all those people were volunteers. Like, that's a really great thing to hear. Oftentimes we get compared to like a Broadway show. That's a great compliment, especially for our casts. These are all people that are just volunteering because they love it. These are not, our actors aren't paid. We're all just doing it because we love it.
See, I like that.
Yeah.
So, in terms of legacy and building legacy, as you progress and you proceed and you're building the High Point Community Theater into something that people are aware of, and you are building an audience with them, and one that resonates out in the community. What do you hope that people will remember about the theater from this time, and what are you hoping that you're kind of instilling in people that is sort of your messaging from a theater standpoint?
Yeah. So I want people to, obviously I want people to remember the quality of the shows. Like, I want them to remember that, we to know that we do put on good shows. And we've worked really hard. This board that we have right now has been around for a while, probably about a decade. I would say most of us have been on there for about a decade. And I think we've made some really great strides with the theater. I think it's also very important that we stay in the black. We don't go in the red, which I think is really very difficult in this day and age. So we're very good at managing our money. I think that is something to be very proud of, especially after COVID with so many theaters going under. I'm really proud of what we've done. That I think is from the business standpoint, those are two things. From a personal standpoint, I love to hear HPCT is my home or HPCT is my family. Like that's, we hear that a lot. And that really, that says it all. Like when somebody says that, the HPCT is my home theater, or this is where I feel at home. And I feel like I'm part of that family. That is like, that's really what it's all about, because it's bringing people together, and it's making memories for those people that they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. Like, for example, we see people come and go all the time. It's like they either move away, or they're not able to be involved in theater. We have a lot of professionals or whatever. They get to do a show a year or a show every couple of years. Or you've got the kids that grow up and move on. And I've been through many a cycle now of children growing up and moving on. And it was really hard at first, because I was like, oh, those were my babies. But watching them grow and move on.
Did you ever see them come back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've
See
seen
them come back, and social media helps a lot, because we
Right.
get a chance to kind of keep up with them. But watching those kids go on to do whatever it is, because sometimes it'll be related to theater and sometimes it won't. But whatever it is that they do, they're always going to carry that experience that they had with us with them. For example, I got a graduation notice for a young woman who, I believe the first show she did with us, she was probably 10. She just graduated from UNC. And she is going to Europe to study environmentalism. So it's nothing to do with theater, but the girl is on a great track, and she's doing what she loves, and she has all of that with her. She had a minor in theater, so that meant that she still got to do theater while she was in college. But yeah, it's really great to watch these humans evolve into like pretty great adults.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So in terms of if we're going to share words of encouragement to the child or the adult, the working professional or the job, what encouragement would you give them if they've if they think that maybe they want to do it, but they're reserved about doing it? What would you tell them?
Oh, you should definitely just try.
Just try.
Like, just try. And here's the thing is, the unfortunate thing about theater is it's not always a like take all comers kind of thing. We have to have auditions. So that's tough, because you don't, you have to walk the line between, you want to encourage people. And I do this oftentimes with my students, like my voice students, who'll want to get involved in theater. And I'll say, good, okay, good, come and audition. And then, they happen to audition for The Sound of Music, which has 7 children and 1 child that they could actually play. And there's 98 people that auditioned, So that is tough, because then you're like, you want to encourage involvement, but then you also have to stipulate it with, not everybody's going to be able to do it. So that's the part that stinks about it. But I tell people to just keep trying, and that's the thing is, some shows are more conducive for beginners than others. For like kids, our summer camps are great. They fill up, like our summer camps this year filled up in 2 hours. They filled up very, very quickly. So, but our summer camps are great for beginners, because everyone is cast. Everyone is going to be in the show. So it's a really great way. There's no rejection. It's just automatically you're in it. So that's great. For adults, when you've got a show like Christmas Carol that can have up to 70 people, that's going to be a lot more likely for a beginner to be able to play a role in the ensemble and be part of it than it would be for, a show like Noises Off that has, 14 people in it. Or Next to Normal that had 6, right? So I just tell people to keep trying and keep going. But when we go back to, lessons that theater teaches you, that perseverance is a huge thing. Perseverance and ability to navigate rejection, because it happens in the theater. And that's one thing I go over a lot of times with my, my kids, oftentimes my parents, with children who aren't cast in something or don't get the role that they had hoped they would get. I remind them that if this is something they truly want to keep doing,
Right.
Finding a way to live in and navigate rejection or disappointment,
Right.
is part of it. So
Yeah.
you have to face it. You can't avoid it.
That is really interesting. That is such it is good preparation, because you're right. Not everybody gets a trophy, and that's life, as good preparation for life. And
it
even
is, and this day and age, it's getting a little harder and harder, because they're in a lot of activities, we're finding ways to recognize everyone, which I don't disagree with, but theater doesn't happen to be one of those. So you just have to learn. My rule of thumb, and I tell this to children and adults, if you are disappointed, you give yourself that day.
Okay.
So say you find out at 3:00 that you did not get that. You live in that sorrow. You wallow in it. You cry.
Right.
You eat the chocolate ice cream. You do all the things that you need to do.
Yep.
Yes. Have the big cries and have the pity party and be upset until you wake up the next morning.
That's right.
And then when you wake up the next morning, then it's time to move on. So if you've gotten cast in the show, you jump full force into whatever role you were given that might not be the role that you had hoped for.
Right.
If you didn't get cast, then you start preparing for the next thing.
That's exactly right.
You start looking forward and think, what can I do next?
It's incredible how this podcast, we do talk to creatives in all different, industries, and the perseverance, that same story is told again and again and again, whether you want to be a photographer, an artist, a performer, a musician, an author, any walk that is creative. Perseverance is the name of the game. I mean, It is the most important thing that you can constantly keep intact. And you're right. Sometimes it is cathartic to have that moment of, this sucks. I didn't get it. I really wanted it. I saw myself doing this, and, it didn't happen this time. It didn't happen right now. But preparation meets opportunity. We call that luck, and there's nothing lucky about it. It is just being in the right place at the right time with the right preparation to be able to handle what you're up against.
Yep.
And that includes disappointment, and it includes failure. It includes trying so hard and not quite meeting the mark at that time.
One of my favorite stories is Dylan, my oldest. He was up for Les in Newsies on Broadway when he was 10. Both my boys had an agent, and we had just gotten off a cruise and got a phone call that said they would like to see Dylan in New York tomorrow for Newsies. So we drove home, and we all packed, and we drove up there, and we went, and he auditioned. He stood on the steps of Telsey & Company, which is like one of the largest casting agencies in New York, at 10 years old, and said to me, "Mommy, how many times have you auditioned on Broadway?" And in his mind, this was just a very normal thing, because he's 10. And I was like, "Well, baby, no, I've never auditioned on Broadway. This is very special. This is something different. Mommy's never done this." But in his mind, it was like, okay, well, this is something everybody does.
Right.
So he went through it, and he had so much fun. He loved it. We got a phone call that they needed to check his height. And we checked his height, and he was a quarter of an inch too tall.
Oh, my
to play
goodness.
Les. A quarter of an inch, right? Now, how do you explain to a 10-year-old the reason why you did not get this role on Broadway is because you were a quarter of an inch
You were
too
that
tall.
much too
You
tall.
know, and he's telling me he's bawling and I'm bawling because he's bawling. And he's like, you know, I can scrunch down and like, you know, doing all these
Right.
things. But you know, and I said to him, baby, this is just a piece of theater that like sometimes there are just non-negotiables. Sometimes there are things that there's nothing we can do. It's just, this is the way it is. And in theater, you know, that's a really important thing is your size is very important because you share a role with another child and it's costumes. And it's like, there's a lot of things that go into it. So that was a hard lesson for him to learn. But I always tell adults and kids, you know, theater is like when you're putting together a show, it's like putting together a puzzle. But that puzzle is like there could be multiple different versions of that puzzle, right? Like you could have an under the water puzzle, right? Here's one. And then over here, there's another version of that. And it could have the same fish and the same, but it is put together differently because the pieces might be a little bigger or whatever. You know, when you're doing a show, it's like a puzzle. And sometimes you're just not the right piece for that puzzle. And you could be the right piece for the next puzzle.
Right.
It's just this one, for whatever reason, you could just be a quarter of an inch too tall.
That is
and
amazing.
That's it. Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up, I would like to talk to you briefly about what you're excited about that's coming up in the High Point Community Theater, as well as where people can find you, and if they want to reach out to either audition or to support, you know, the High Point Community Theater, where can they connect with you?
Yes. So we have a website, and that is hpct.net. So you can always check us out there. We have a pretty active Facebook page, High Point Community Theater. Those would be, I'd say, the best ways. You can also email us. That's hpct.info@gmail.com. But those are all ways to get a hold of us. Our board is a working board, so we are completely volunteer run. We just recently, literally Monday, hired a part-time operations manager to just kind of help us with some of the things like email. And so if you reach out to us and we don't hear right away, it's just because there's 12 of us working other full-time jobs trying to run this theater, but that shows you how much we love it. But those are the ways to get a hold of us. Our auditions will always post on our website and then also our Facebook page. Coming up this summer, we still have a few spots in our Behind the Curtain camp, which is our technical theater camp that runs in July for 2 weeks in the evenings, and that's for ages 12 to adult. And so those are for people that maybe don't want to be on the stage, but are more interested in set building or prop making or costume making, stage management, those types of things. So that's a really great opportunity. Then we do have the performances of our summer camps this summer. So in July, we have 101 Dalmatians Kids. That will be performed in July at Centennial Station Arts Center. And then in August, we have Peter Pan Jr. That will be performed in Centennial Station. And then our 50th season is being kicked off with Sorted Lives, which we are rehearsing right now. That is also going to be at Centennial Station, and that is July 4th weekend. That is a show for grown-ups only. That is not an appropriate one for the children. It's a funny one. It'll have you rolling. But that one is our opener. Then we have Groundhog Day, the musical, based off the film. That's in October over at High Point Theater. Then we have the 11th annual production of A Christmas Carol, the musical. That is December. And in March, we have Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is a really great classic. Everyone loves that one.
Very much.
That's got adults, kids. It's got the whole gamut in it. Same thing with Christmas Carol, adults and children.
Andrew Lloyd Webber who did that originally? Yep. Yeah.
And then in May, we have Noises Off, which is a straight play, no music in that one.
Okay.
And that is a comedy. But if you go to the High Point Theater website, or if you just go to our website, you can get tickets to any of the High Point Theater shows. And those would be Groundhog Day, Christmas Carol, Joseph and Noises Off. And you can also get season passes. And a season pass is a great deal. It reserves your seat for all 4 shows. You get a discount. So that's another good way to come see us. But yeah, so those are all different ways. High Point Theater website will have all the shows that are performing there.
And links to your social media as well. Okay,
links
that's
to our
perfect.
social media, and yeah. So, but our website should have a lot of information. But we welcome everyone. We would love to have, come audition. Come, if you go to our website, we have a volunteer form that you can fill out. So if you want to volunteer for something, like whether it's working backstage, or if you've got some skills in marketing or lighting design, anything like that you think, hey, maybe the theater might be interested, or set building,
Right.
we definitely can find a place for you so that you can kind of join our family and work on these shows. But
That is perfect.
yeah, lots of ways to get involved.
Well, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this is a really good episode. It was motivating. It was inspiring. And again, I think that the more, our local listeners can, find out more about the performing arts and the High Point Community Theater, we're going to encourage it from our side. And we'll definitely be there to watch the productions this fall. I'm already excited for them.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.